Jonathan Hale was a man whose name echoed through boardrooms and headlines. A self-made billionaire in his early 40s, he lived alone in a penthouse that soared above the skyline, a place filled with rare art, silent marble halls, and a staff trained to work like ghosts. To Jonathan, rules were sacred, boundaries absolute. So when he walked into his gleaming kitchen one morning and found Maria, his newly hired maid, bent over and quietly inspecting the inside of his refrigerator, his temper ignited like a flame on gasoline. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Maria gasped, closing the fridge door as if it burned her fingers. I was just," she stammered, but Jonathan didn't let her finish. "That food doesn't belong to you. You're here to clean, not to help yourself." Maria, a soft-spoken woman in her late 50s, lowered her eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. "I wasn't taking anything for myself, sir. But her words were drowned beneath the wave of his rising irritation. "Don't insult me with excuses," he said coldly. "You're fired, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria's lips quivered, but she didn't argue. With a quiet nod, she removed her apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on the counter. Her eyes were glossy with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Thank you for the opportunity," she whispered before walking out the door, her back straight despite the weight on her shoulders. Jonathan stood there for a moment, fuming with a sense of self-righteous justice. To him, the situation was simple. He couldn't tolerate dishonesty, not after the betrayals he'd suffered in business and life. But something about the way Maria had looked at him, more in sorrow than guilt, unsettled him deep down. He shook it off, convincing himself he'd done the right thing. After all, trust was expensive, and people didn't just open the fridge in a billionaire's home without permission. Yet as the day went on, and the silence in his luxurious apartment grew louder, that unsettled feeling began to fester. He had no idea that this simple act of dismissal would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about compassion and himself. That night, the silence in Jonathan Hale's penthouse felt heavier than usual. He tried to return to his routine: emails, investment reports, a late glass of bourbon. But his mind kept drifting back to Maria's face. There was something in her eyes that haunted him, not defiance, not guilt, but desperation. For a man who thrived on calculated decisions, the nagging discomfort was unwelcome. Still, he pushed it aside, until his chef, during preparations for an upcoming investor dinner, mentioned a curious detail. "Sir, we were short a few eggs this morning. I thought I'd misplaced them, but it's strange," he said casually. Jonathan paused. Eggs, the refrigerator, Maria. The image flashed in his mind like a jigsaw piece snapping into place. Driven by a mix of suspicion and curiosity, Jonathan pulled up the security footage from that morning. He watched as Maria entered the kitchen and opened the fridge with cautious hands. But instead of grabbing something and eating it, she gently wrapped 2 eggs, a small slice of cheese, and a piece of bread in a cloth napkin. His brows furrowed. Then came the most unexpected part. Maria walked out to the balcony, tied a string to the bundle, and slowly lowered it down over the railing. Jonathan leaned forward, transfixed. On the ground-level camera, a small, frail-looking child darted from the alley beside the building, retrieved the bundle, and vanished just as quickly. Jonathan stared at the screen in stunned silence. It wasn't theft. It wasn't greed. It was kindness, hidden in secrecy. Maria hadn't been feeding herself. She'd been feeding someone else. A child. Likely hungry. Likely someone she didn't want to see suffer. A bitter wave of guilt crashed over him, stronger than he expected. In his world of mergers and margins, he'd grown so detached that he'd assumed the worst of a woman, simply doing what she could to survive and protect someone vulnerable. The luxury around him suddenly felt hollow. He had fired her without asking a single question. The realization left a knot in his chest, one that no amount of money or logic could untangle. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hale didn't feel powerful. He felt ashamed. Jonathan couldn't shake the image of the small child, retrieving that bundle of food. The footage replayed in his mind like a loop, each time carving a deeper cut into his conscience. He had acted out of pride, not reason, and now the truth haunted him. The following morning, without informing his assistant or staff, Jonathan stepped into his private car and ordered his driver to take him to the address Maria had listed on her employee records. The building stood in stark contrast to his glass and marble world, a crumbling apartment complex with peeling paint, rusted gates, and children playing barefoot in the dust. It was a world Jonathan had long forgotten, if he had ever known it at all. He climbed the narrow staircase, each creaking step a confrontation with his guilt. After asking a few hesitant neighbors, he found her door, a thin wooden frame with a worn-out handle and faded curtain in the window. He hesitated before knocking. When Maria opened it, her eyes widened with surprise and fear. She clutched her shawl tightly, standing protectively in front of the children inside. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, disbelief trembling in her voice. Jonathan stood awkwardly, his confidence reduced to rubble. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. "I was wrong." Maria stepped aside, uncertain but polite. Inside, the apartment was tidy but bare. A frail man lay resting on a thin mattress. Her husband, Jonathan realized. 2 children sat quietly at the table, their faces lit up when they saw Maria, but their cheeks hollow with hunger. He learned everything then. How Maria's daughter had died in a house fire, how she'd taken in her orphaned grandchildren, how her husband had fallen ill, leaving her to provide for them all. She worked 2 jobs, and sometimes there simply wasn't enough food. So she had quietly lowered meals to the alley where the children waited after school, too ashamed to bring them through the front of the building in her uniform. Jonathan listened, overwhelmed. The woman he had judged as a thief was a hero in silence. Her strength didn't scream, it whispered through sacrifice. His voice cracked as he said again, "I'm sorry." Maria simply nodded, tears filling her eyes. She didn't need his pity, only his understanding. And in that moment, Jonathan Hale felt smaller than he ever had, but more human than ever before. The encounter with Maria changed something deep within Jonathan Hale. For years, he had walked through life armored in wealth, guarded by success, and blind to the struggles of those who served quietly beneath his feet. But after seeing Maria's reality, her sacrifice, her courage, her quiet grace, his hardened perspective began to soften. That very week, he didn't just offer Maria her job back, he offered her dignity. He hired a private physician for her husband, enrolled the children in a nearby private school, and gave her a full-time position as his household manager, with benefits, flexibility, and a new car to commute safely. But more importantly, he made her a partner in a new dream. Jonathan used his resources to establish Maria's Hands, a foundation in her name devoted to supporting single caregivers, underpaid domestic workers, and overlooked families in crisis. He told her it was the least he could do for the lessons she had taught him. She protested at first, humble as always, but he insisted. The world doesn't just need money. He told her, it needs people who care enough to notice. Maria began to visit shelters and speak to other women, her story touching hearts far beyond Jonathan's reach. Years passed, and the children grew healthy and bright. Her grandson won a scholarship in science. Her granddaughter started painting, her artwork displayed proudly in Jonathan's office. As for him, he changed too. The man who once judged a woman for peeking into his fridge now sat on boards advocating for ethical labor practices and worked with legislators to improve conditions for domestic workers nationwide. One evening, at a large charity gala hosted by his company, Jonathan stood on stage in front of cameras, CEOs, and celebrities. But he didn't speak about profit margins or innovation. He told the story of a maid, a fridge, and a misunderstood act of compassion that opened his eyes and heart. She didn't take food, he said, voice thick with emotion. She gave love, and I, blinded by my own world, almost missed it. In the front row, Maria sat holding her grandchildren's hands, tears in her eyes, no longer the forgotten maid, but the reason a billionaire finally learned how to be truly rich.